Well, as Matric learners await their results, it's both a significant achievement and a moment of reflection. Whether it's joy, relief, or disappointment, the emotions are running high. Today, we delve into how students are coping with the outcomes and what lies ahead. How can we better support those facing challenges, and how do we celebrate the successes? Well, to explore this, we are joined by clinical psychologist Dr. Keitumetsi Mashigo and an education expert, Professor Brahm Fleisch from the Wits School of Education, who will also share insights on managing expectations, resilience, and the pathways forward. Good afternoon to you both, and thank you so much for your time. Perhaps, Dr. Mashigo, let me start with you. I mean, D-Day for the Matric results announcements have been set for the 13th of January 2025 to allow, of course, for the 2025 curriculum to kick off 2 days after that. It is an anxious time, not only for students, but also for parents. Perhaps let's talk about how, those students that had high expectations for doing well in these exams can better use this time just to reflect, but also cope with the anxiety.
Thank you for having me. Anxiety is all about the things that we think about, what we internalize, which then, becomes leads to anxious behavior, and it manifests differently in different people. So the first step is for them to understand how their anxiety manifests in them, and also, ways to better deal with it. And there's different ways of doing that to manage the anxiety. It could be, distracting yourself with things that you enjoy doing, because we only know what we know, right? And you don't know how the results are going to be until you actually get the results. So you really need to time, the thinking around the results, the worrying around the results, and also to, wait on, doing things that you enjoy while you're waiting for the results to come. But also to see, if you're struggling, for example, if the anxiety manifests itself in terms of how you sleep, how you eat, then to, become more intentional in understanding that the only thing we can control is this moment. And, we don't know what we don't know about the results, and to approach them with, 50% chance they might go well, 50% chance they might not go well, but having the grace to deal with whatever outcome that comes, and the strength and trusting that you'll be able to overcome whatever the results are.
Let me bring in Professor Fleisch, if you can allow me. Prof, it is an interesting time too for those that have completed their 2024 Matric papers, because they now look forward to entering the higher education, a system, if I can call it that. But most of the time what we see is even those that have qualified with several distinctions don't necessarily get into the university that they want to. Some then have to opt for other alternatives. During this time, how can they manage just that expectation of having to face the reality that many may not actually make it into education of higher learning facilities? Some have to even settle for, your TVET colleges.
I think it's very important during this crucial time. And as you said, it's a very emotional time. Your life expectations are set by what you're going to do in grade 12. And so there is a lot of emphasis on thinking about what the consequences of these results will be. In my view, one of the really important roles that parents can play is to help children understand options. So even if you haven't done as well as you want, there are always options, and to understand what those options are, to explore the various aspects of those options, and ultimately make a decision about which of the options are optimal or most appropriate for you. And that's a role that parents can play, is essentially say, we will see what happens, we can plan on various scenarios, and we can think through what the implications of those scenarios. So when the final results become public, they can then begin to think about what is best for them in this particular situation.
Dr. Mashigo, are we setting our children up for failure to some degree? Because when you look at just the number of, matriculants who wrote the paper this year compared to the universities that are available for them. I think there's a roughly 26 higher education universities out there with about 50 or so TVET colleges. Then you look at your private institutions too. When we look at the odds, is that going to be a problem going forward, particularly for those students that have really want to take, their education studies further? They may have the necessary resources in as form as, paying for their tuition, but they simply, the odds are really stacking against them. How do you best prepare for that expectation too? Especially where, there are options of maybe starting your own business while you're waiting, before you study, if at all it is possible. But what are the options for students to navigate there?
It's important, as society to really see that there is life, even if you don't end up in a university institution. So to look at, there's other great options as, available out there, and your matric results and also entry into a tertiary institution does not define you, and also does not define how you would be in this life. It does not predict how successful you will be. So we really need to think outside of the box when it comes to our careers, success rates, and also just, selecting the thing that you want to do with your life. And I think as parents, as a society, as teachers, we really need to promote, children who think creatively and outside of the box, not just streamlining them into tertiary institutions, because honestly, we really need more tertiary institutions for the number, the population that we have. So there is really a limited number of institutions or options for people to go into in terms of their tertiary institutions, even if you have the resources. But we really need to really educate people about that you can be successful in different ways, and also that time is not a factor, because also there's that pressure that people must complete, a certain degree within 4 years after matric or with an honors degree. But really, you can take up to 7 years to complete whatever it is that you are doing, and doing the things that you love also at the same time, and also understanding yourself and becoming the best version of yourself in spite of what's happening. But of course, we have the realities of unemployment and, such difficult socioeconomic situations, circumstances in South Africa that we also need to bear in mind for these matriculants to be.
Prof, I want to weigh in on just the various studies that we've seen, at least in this year, that speak to how South Africa is performing from a literacy perspective, but also from a maths and science perspective. Recent utterances made by the Department of Basic Education, in fact, the Minister of Basic Education, saying that the state of maths and science in South Africa should be of grave concern to educators. Of course, we know that the department saying that 7,543 pupils achieved distinctions in maths this year in the third quarter test, compared to 7,503 in 2023. Is there enough emphasis in as far as maths and science or any of the STEM, curricula, that we are actually not paying the necessary attention that we should be, and we are looking at it only after, those matric exams have been written, to only concentrate on that? Where are we missing the mark here, perhaps?
So I think the department needs to be given credit. Last week, the department released 3 separate studies: systemic evaluation, the TIMS results, and the SACMEC, which measures learning performance in grade 6 in maths and language across the SADC region. And the results show very consistently that many of our children are struggling in the early stages of their school career. So between grade 1 and grade 6, many children are not acquiring the basics of literacy and mathematics, and that's obviously going to be a major binding constraint. So if you're starting to study science in grade 7 or grade 8, if you are not really a strong reader, you don't have a strong vocabulary, it will put very serious barriers to your ability to master the subjects. And I think, to the department's credit, they've been very public about the process, and that there are plans afoot. And I think the new minister has made it a very clear priority to focus on early grade learning, and particularly early grade reading and mathematics. And I think that it's not a journey that will be achieved in 1 or 2 years. It's something that the system needs to be focusing on in the next decade to really upgrade the quality of early grade learning in the first few years of schooling as a major vehicle for improving the system overall.
And Dr. Mashigo, just in terms of individuals themselves improving their own retention of the quality of education that they're receiving or may not be receiving, that also perhaps puts added pressure on pupils. I would imagine also parents, specifically if you have children that have underlying conditions of maybe anxiety or maybe not retaining the level of education that is given like the rest of the students there. How do those students cope, especially when they probably have to take a step back and say, I didn't do so well in these exams, and there is an opportunity for me now to do better. Where then can they get those necessary coping mechanisms during this time?
Parents of such or caregivers of children who struggle or do not fall within the norm curve in terms of their performance, in terms of how their brain is wired, really need a lot of support. They need understanding caregivers that even if they did not do, as well as, the other kids, doing the same grade or, doing the same subject, that it's not the end of the world, that, there are other ways in which they can be successful in spite of their marks. Sometimes as caregivers, they project onto their children the desires they had for education, which is not always the reality with the child in the picture. So we really need to understand that as caregivers, that you're not projecting your own desires. Maybe someone, for example, wanted to perform well in mathematics and they're expecting their child to do the same, and their child struggles with that because their brain is wired differently. That to understand that it doesn't mean the child is a failure. We just need to find the strengths of that child and help them achieve in the things that they can do, because there are certain things that children can do, to make them great in spite of not doing well in mainstream education. So we really need to even talk about things like your special needs children who need extra support, remedial education needs, and children with different diagnoses such as, your ADHD. You get things like people who struggle with numbers, people who struggle with dyslexia, words. So we really need to ensure that the schooling environment has support for all these types of diagnoses, which is not always the case. Unfortunately, it's more found in the private schools, and we really need to make sure that in the public sector as well, that we get the support so the children can cope and, find what their strengths are so that they can become something in this life.
And as we are about to wrap up our conversation, I just want to stay with you on that, Dr. Mashigo, just to expand a little on how that can also extend to university or technikon. How do students who then move away from their support system, who have those special needs, cope in a new environment? First-year students, we see, of course, a lot of the time give up halfway through the year, and some of them struggle throughout the year.
It's important for the caregivers to understand that any change, is going to cause a lot of anxiety, adjustment. A child moving from matric into university is a different environment altogether, where the teachers are not on your back to do the work, to understand the work. And then there's peer pressure and, the freedom as well of being away from home sometimes, or the first time you're away from home. So there's going to be, added anxiety on top of some of the learning difficulties or the challenges one might have. So again, support is really needed from the people around those children who have these struggles naturally or in the way in which they are wired. But also institutions of learning have support structures in place, and most students are not aware of this. When you just ask the lecturers if there is psychologists, for example, on campus, or counselors, or people on campus to help, in this academic journey of yours. They are there, there is that. And also maybe if you find yourself in the wrong career where you're struggling with certain things, they can have an assessment and help you find the career that works for you, at the level at which you are functioning. And you can also do this before you enter the institution, but also when you are in the institution and you find yourself not coping, that you can get assessed and get help so you find the proper degree for you.
Yeah. Prof, 30 seconds as we wrap the conversation, unfortunately. Just your sentiment on what Dr. Mashigo is saying, particularly in terms of support from higher institutions.
I think that she's absolutely right. We need to encourage young people who are going to university for the first time to reach out, to seek the services and the support they need from their lecturers, from other sources, from their fellow students, that it's really difficult transition, but with the right kind of support and the ability to reach out and say to somebody, I need a bit of help, I need a bit of information, I need to know where to go, I need to know how to cope with my feelings. With that kind of reaching out, it'll be much, much, much better for young people as they wade through that very, very powerful transition moment as they go from schooling to university.